Hello and welcome. My name is Vladislav Novikov. My guest today is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and local elected official in the state of Wisconsin. Yuri, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm just excited to be visiting with you today from capital of, the world, New York City, where I don't live, but I'm visiting because I was asked to throw a ceremonial first pitch at a baseball game. I couldn't pass it up. So I came out, and it was actually in support of Ukraine. It was put together by this gentleman named Dmitry Sagalchik, who is involved in New York and baseball community and organized an annual charity game for Ukraine at a baseball stadium. We got these cool T-shirts. I threw out a baseball pitch. I didn't hurt anybody. Fantastic.
Yuri, we have a good news too. Now to the US and the silence from one man. Donald Trump is unusually quiet after the Ukrainian strike. He hasn't posted any angry comments or blame Ukraine for derailing peace efforts. Why do you think that is? Is this a sign of a shift in his position or just a calculated pause?
It's a very interesting thing you would say that he would be quiet because, well, first of all, Donald Trump isn't known for being quiet. That is not a feature, quality, anything that's associated with him. On the other hand, here in New York, I get up in the morning, I go to get a cup of coffee, and I walk into a corner bodega, like a coffee place where they can make you breakfast on a bagel. And there's yelling on TV in Pakistani language about the attack. About the Ukrainian attack on Russia and how this is going to affect the relationship and what's happening now between India and Pakistan. Because this is the noise that attack generated worldwide. We saw something similar when the ship Moscow went down and Ukraine managed to, send to the bottom of the sea a very important Russian battleship, which signaled that Russian might isn't all it is cracked up to be. So that's an important moment right there because clearly we're at that stage again. And for Donald Trump, who said more than once that Ukraine has no cards to play, this seems like Ukraine just got a new deck. And it has lots of cards. In fact, it's kind of nice to see all the memes out there about this attack showing Zelensky in like suits made of playing cards and how he's just made of cards now. Because this sends a very important message right as Ukraine and Russia are supposed to have their next negotiation session, because Russia doesn't negotiate, Russia waits for capitulation. And I think never has expectations of Ukrainian capitulation looked more ridiculous than they do after the successful attack conducted expertly within Russia by Ukraine and showing how, again, highlighting the weakness and ineptness of Russia. How can this country be looked at as a serious player when they can't secure their airfields in Siberia? And there's of course, Russian, as they're, spinning this as Pearl Harbor, which, of course, on one hand was a terrible tragedy for the United States, but on the other hand, ended with a more terrible tragedy of dropping 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. And Russia, when they say Pearl Harbor, they are, of course, are opening the door for, well, if we have to use nuclear weapons, United States did it, Pearl Harbor, you get it. So I think that there is this attempt to try to use this really successful military operation as an attempt to motivate Russians. And I think it's really important to understand how much this attack motivates Ukrainians and people all over the world. Because when we discuss, we try to be sensible and say, well, maybe it's 34% of Russian strategic bombers that were destroyed, maybe less, maybe they were damaged, who knows. Let's not get overexcited. I think it's the wrong way to go about it. because I think we should get those victories the same as we need to acknowledge the tragedies. And I think that this is it's an amazing battle that Ukraine won. And the fact that Donald Trump refuses to acknowledge it, well, it speaks poorly of Donald Trump, not the first time today. But at the same time, it highlights how strong Ukraine is. And this is exactly what I've been saying for, I don't know, for a long time, that rather than speaking from the position of Ukraine needs to speak from the position of strength. Yes, you can't initiate these kinds of operations every day, perhaps, but think about the powerful effect that the pager operation had in Israel and on terrorists in Lebanon. When, you know, all of a sudden it turned out how vulnerable the whole structure was to being incinerated by a pager, a set of pagers. And so I think something similar we're observing here, where this is not necessarily Russia's Pearl Harbor, but more like Russia's pager explosion, where something that was held so close and so dear and so important blew up and went up in flames just like that.
You know, President Zelensky says Russia's losses will force Putin to negotiate, but isn't it more likely that Trump will be the one to push Russia to the table? Yesterday's drone strike on Russia airfields was extraordinary, and you already mentioned that. Some even compare it to Pearl Harbor in terms of impact. Do you think this attack will really influence the path to negotiate?
Well, one thing about being a dictator means never having to say you're sorry, you failed, that things are not working out, because you're a dictator, you're in charge, this is it, this is yours. And I think that Putin put himself in a position consciously, on purpose. He is in that death, electric chair of Kremlin where there is no retirement. And he is there until the end. And his desire is to clearly subjugate Ukraine. And everything he continues to do, like no matter, he just it doesn't seem to change his mind. However, at this particular point, at the moment in time, because timing matters and location matters, and timing of this is that right before negotiations, you have this attack, which I think really clearly sends a message that Ukraine is in no position to capitulate. And in fact, anybody who thinks that after this successful attack, Ukraine is going to be capitulating doesn't understand the dynamics and missing certain pieces of information in their daily briefing, because that is inaccurate. And I think it is really troublesome and yet a sign of times that here in the United States, we're discussing that our Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is planning on or looking at ways to make this intelligence briefing for our president more interesting, more engaging, more like Fox News video report, because that's what President watches. So while Ukraine is executing these, really great campaign that are powerfully subversive and raise the battle spirit of Ukrainians, we have a Paco should be arrested. So there's all of a sudden we see that there's a weakness in their strength, and then there's ways of projecting each, and we see how leaders of different countries are doing it. Will Putin be pushed towards negotiation table? I think he's going to feel very embarrassed. And the problem with making people who consider themselves to be powerful, reminding them that they're not powerful and really shaming them and embarrassing them, is that there's going to be a reaction. It's going to be depending on who is what available and so on. And once again, when Russians open their mouth and speak about Pearl Harbor, that means that they're in their mind, they're opening a justification for using nuclear devices, nuclear bombs, as a response for this. While really what that meant for the United States is that we buried at sea our old fleet and we built a new fleet, and we rearmed our army. We made our army a priority, and in just a few years, we were a crucial part of victory in World War II. So I think that this is another example of Pearl Harbor that Russians are missing, because building things isn't what they do. The bombers that were destroyed were built by, in the Soviet Union, quite likely in Ukraine itself. But now they don't build those things anymore, and now they won't even have them for part much. Maybe they'll be able to make like monuments out of them, of the battle of whatever. I think that Putin is going to go to negotiation table when he's not able to respond. So this is where if response looks laughable, then I think this is when we see that whether Putin wants to fight or not, it doesn't really matter because he's not capable of much. He's sitting in Kremlin, he's pressing buttons and nothing happens. But we're not there yet, because even if Ukraine destroyed 34% of Russian strategic aviation, there's still 66% that can go and do damage and attack peaceful civilians, because that's what Russia does. Russia is not interested in winning on the battlefield. They want to terrorize the population into subjugation. So when people are celebrating, it has to be done with the understanding that there will be price to pay, because this is a war, but that without the victories, without battles that you win, it's hard to have a war that you win. So first you got to have some battles that you win. And I think I like actually that this attack is also being compared to the successful Ukrainian attack and in the fall of 2022, where we saw that Russians can run very, very fast. And that was an important moment too, because those moments, they live for a while, they matter. I think that the Moscow ship that went down resulted in stamps and mail stamps and lots of different graphic and art and cultural impact of that ship that it never had when it was just a military installation. But when it became a cultural symbol for failure of Russia, that's when it became really truly symbolic. So I think that Ukrainians are doing the right things and they're going to have the right results. Russia is doing the wrong things and they're going to have the wrong results.
Okay, Yuri, let's talk about U.S. economy and growing risk. JP Morgan warns that American bonds market could face serious trouble if Washington doesn't act on the national debt. What exactly is going on?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And, just because I'm in New York City doesn't mean that I know precisely what's going on Wall Street. But when Jamie Dimon says that there could be a crack in the bond market, I tend to believe him, because he seems to be in the know about things that are happening. He runs a pretty big corporation, and Chase. So I think that we should listen to him. But this is a fundamental issue of Trump administration, where experts are considered a threat. And if loyalists are considered a strength. So the less you know, the more you're willing to admit that 2 + 2 = whatever president said today, the more likely you are to succeed in this administration. And whenever people have their own opinions and their expert opinions, they're going to have problems with this administration. Now, when it comes to the economy, we seem to be doing okay so far. But, for those that are curious, it's early June 2025. It's beginning of June of 2025. It would be interesting to see, and I'm no less interested than our viewers, to see how this video is going to age. How is it going to look in a month or 2 or 3? Because right now, it seems like things are okay. The dollar stores that sell cheap things made in China continue to be there. But we hear that there's really a slowdown in ships and all those things. It also highlights to what extent I think President Trump's trade war has been a magnificent failure, one big, beautiful failure, because he's managed to get a rare earth negotiation done with Ukraine. That's pretty much his biggest victory that Ukraine gave him. And the United Kingdom agreed to a deal that nobody can really even figure out what's in it, because it doesn't seem to be much of a deal other than it's a frame for a picture. Picture is yet to be drawn. Okay, that's a big victory. And everybody else, China seems to be stalling. European Union seems to be stalling. Trump seems to be putting in tariffs and taking them off, putting them back, taking them off. It's not serious policy. And for a while, we're going to have a situation where people are just kind of be like, oh, this is the new swings. Today it's like this, tomorrow it's like this. Today it's like this, tomorrow. President gets up, president go to bed. President gets up, he is angry, he goes to bed, he wants to make peace. Whatever, and it's not a sustainable way to run an economy. And I think people are very nervous from that level. And at the same time, we have a big invasion essentially from artificial intelligence, which is just as much as it is changing the battlefield in Ukraine, is changing our economy and our employment situation here in the United States. And we have people graduating from universities looking at a possibility of having a difficult time finding a job because artificial intelligence essentially replaced them, which is ironic because so many of today's college students got through college using artificial intelligence. So, you put in what you get out, get out what you put in. But that's, neither here nor there. I think that this administration is also bringing a staggering level of corruption to the United States, which we're not quite familiar with and not sure what to do with. We're relying on our institutions. While Donald Trump is emptying out those institutions, fires people, people quit, and those kinds of things. Elon Musk, who's, I guess, the latest quitter, the black eye recipient in the Oval Office, that's the level at which they operate now. When you leave White House, you have a literal, I guess, black eye now. It's not just on reputation. It's not just a mark on your company. Elon Musk, a beautiful example of somebody who came too close to Donald Trump and is getting destroyed now, because his company is being shredded, and there's a possibility that Donald Trump will want to go after Elon Musk next. Because you know what? Elon's got a lot of money. Donald doesn't like that. So we'll see how all of these things play out inside the United States. But the situation is such that we're finding good news in Ukraine these days.
And finally, China and the US, is the trade war over? There are reports of a possible phone call this week between Trump and Xi Jinping. What's the current state of US-China relation, and what should be expect from that conversation? Could this be a reset or just more tension?
There doesn't seem to be any real indication that China is interested in really improving relations with the United States. I think they're, at best, not really standing in the way of Donald Trump trying to get himself out of the hole that he dug himself into. But they're not really helping either. And the situation seems to be pretty desperate for the United States, more so than for China, because you can't have a trade war with a dictatorship, because you're kind of missing some of the variables that are so important, like upset consumers. Because upset consumers in an economy that depends on consumer spending is an important feature. Upset consumers or upset people that lost their jobs at factories, it hardly seems to be something that is going to change the power dynamic in China. So that was a fundamental miscalculation, and it's interesting to see how we're also seeing that Donald Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, is being pushed and further away and down and out because of his policy. Even though he was willing to go to jail for Donald Trump, apparently even that did not compensate for the fact that he essentially is destroying the world economy and the United States economy first. So I think that China is looking at we have a president who can't wait for anything. He wants whatever he wants now. We know this since the moment that he admitted on the bus that when he sees a beautiful woman, he just can't help himself, but he wants to grab her, and he does, because that's what you do if you're blah, 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 blah. And here we go back to what we know. And on the other hand, we have China, who expects to sit on the river bench, whatever shore, while the body of the enemy floats by. It's a very different dynamic of looking at time and expectations. And I think that's where the Trump administration is in a very vulnerable position. United States is also in a very vulnerable position because we have become accustomed to this world trade and live in the world where we've been told many times that it can't be any other way. Of course, we have to rely on these other countries to produce T-shirts and clothes, because we're not going to make those in the United States anymore. And then, kind of these assumptions, not realizing that we can have somebody come in charge who is so bad at running a business that he filed bankruptcy 6 times, and he was still elected president, so he's not going to make sound, rational decisions when it comes to business operations. He doesn't do that. That's not how he functions. And we're all paying a price for it, naturally. Because, of course, the price for tariffs is paid by consumers. It's not paid by China. You know, when Donald Trump says the trillions of dollars were put in our treasury by these other countries who are paying tariffs, that's ridiculous, because that's money being taken away from American consumers and American taxpayers, American voters quite often, and being extracted. You know, it's like a reverse Robin Hood, who takes money away from the poor and gives it to the rich. Hello, that's Robin Trump, and we don't really like it. We don't seem to appreciate it. We would like to vote against it, but we don't have an opportunity until one comes up in different places here and there. And I think the elections are so important to follow throughout, again, people do, because that's an indication of the popularity and the ability of a politician to pressure through with their agenda. And when it comes to foreign policy, I just, I'm curious how bad things are going to have to be before Congress really does take away that power away from president, and what indication is it going to be, how bad are things in the United States at that point, where United States Senate actually does step in and does its job of taking away power of tariffs from president. Just scary to imagine how bad things would have to be for Senate to be able to pull themselves to do that kind of a thing. And in the meantime, the dynamic that is also interesting with China is that China is so close with Russia, and Russia has now a controlling stake in American president. So the power dynamic there is very interesting to me, because while some people think that this doesn't put Putin in a good position, I feel like it kind of does. Because when you have an American president who is willing to do anything to be on good terms with the Russian president, and a Russian president who has good relations with China, while Russia is still, being heavily dependent on China, I think its status there is kind of rapidly rising. Of course, when Ukraine does what it did yesterday and destroys and does so much damage to Russian military, it doesn't look very strong, and I don't know what country would want to support that. But if United States is not going to be, if we're going to basically wash our hands and walk away, then what is going to stop China from being more involved in helping Russia militarily? Mm-hmm. And that means that we could be shifting into another stage of this war surrounded by AI drones, and that we're looking at a very dangerous and difficult world then. And China could be just another stage of how we get from here to there.
Yuri, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and insight. Great having you with us.
Thank you so much.